Is the subject of homosexuality actually in the Bible? The topic of homosexuality and its representation in the Bible has been a long-standing subject of debate and interpretation. Several key verses are often cited in discussions about this issue. These verses include Genesis 19, Leviticus 18:22, and Romans 1:26-27. Let's explore these passages, provide some historical context, and look at how different denominations interpret them. Key verse is Genesis 19. This chapter narrates the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, two cities known for their wickedness. Two angels visit Lot, and the men of Sodom demand that Lot bring them out so they can have sexual relations with them. The cities are subsequently destroyed by God as punishment for their sins. Verse: Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them." Genesis 19, 4, 5, Leviticus 18:22. This verse is part of the Holiness Code, a set of laws given to the Israelites. Verse: Do not have sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman. That is detestable. Leviticus 18:22, Romans 1:26-27. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul writes a letter to the Romans, discussing the consequences of turning away from God. Verses: Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. Romans 1:26-27. Historical context. Understanding these verses requires some historical and cultural context. Genesis 19. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah has been traditionally interpreted as a condemnation of homosexual acts. However, some scholars argue that the primary sin was not homosexuality, but rather the lack of hospitality and the intent to commit rape. Leviticus 18. This verse is part of a larger set of purity laws given to the Israelites. These laws were intended to set Israel apart from other nations and maintain ritual purity. The historical context suggests that these prohibitions were specific to the cultural and religious practices of the time. Romans 1. Paul's letter addresses a broader context of idolatry and moral decay. Some scholars believe that Paul's mention of same-sex relations was a critique of the practices associated with pagan rituals rather than a blanket condemnation of homosexual relationships. Comparative analysis of denominational views. Conservative Christian view. Many conservative denominations interpret these verses as a clear condemnation of homosexual acts. They maintain that the Bible unequivocally defines marriage as a union between one man and one woman, and that any sexual activity outside this framework is sinful. Liberal Christian view. Liberal denominations often approach these texts with a focus on historical and cultural context. They argue that the Bible should be understood in the context of the time it was written and that its core message is one of love and inclusion. Many liberal Christians support same-sex relationships and marriage, viewing these passages as specific to ancient cultural practices rather than applicable to contemporary life. Middle ground. Some denominations take a more nuanced approach, acknowledging the traditional interpretations while advocating for compassion and understanding towards LGBTQ+ individuals. They may support civil unions or same-sex marriage, but stress the importance of pastoral care and dialogue. Conclusion. The subject of homosexuality in the Bible is complex and multifaceted, influenced by historical context, cultural practices, and varying interpretations. While certain verses are commonly cited in discussions on this topic, their meanings are widely debated among scholars and religious communities. For those seeking to understand this issue further, it may be helpful to engage in open dialogue with different denominations and perspectives, keeping in mind the overarching themes of love, justice, and compassion that run throughout the Bible.